Under a low grey sky in Kyiv, the air feels tense and deliberate. The echo of distant sirens fades behind the steady rhythm of military briefings, and in a crowded room filled with journalists, cameras and microphones, Ukraine's security service chief Vasyl Malyuk steps forward. His tone is calm but heavy with significance, a report that would ripple far beyond the walls of the Ukrainian capital. I will briefly summarize the results, he begins. Since the start of the year, nearly 160 successful strikes have been carried out against oil extraction and refining facilities. For a country fighting a war that has stretched deep into its third year, this announcement marks a new dimension in Ukraine's campaign, a strategic assault not just on Russian forces, but on the lifeblood of the Russian war economy. Oil, Russia's greatest source of revenue, has become a central target. These strikes, carried out with long-range drones and precision-guided weapons, aim not only to damage infrastructure, but to weaken Moscow's ability to sustain its war chest. Officials in Kyiv describe the campaign as both methodical and adaptive. The targets are chosen for maximum disruption: refineries, terminals, depots and pumping stations that keep Russia's vast energy network alive. The figures Malyuk cites are staggering. In just 2 months, from September to October, Ukraine conducted 20 separate strikes. Among them, 6 refineries, 2 oil terminals, 3 depots, and 9 oil pumping stations were hit. Each attack tells a story of careful intelligence, long-range capability, and a growing confidence in Ukraine's defense technology. Behind the data lies a strategy that extends well beyond the battlefield to the financial and political core of Russia's war machine. Western analysts describe this as Ukraine's shadow front, a war waged not in the trenches of Donetsk or the skies over Kharkiv, but in the unseen battlefields of logistics and infrastructure. Satellite imagery shows smoke columns stretching for miles across regions like Belgorod, Bryansk, and Oryol, areas deep within Russian territory that once seemed untouchable. For months, Moscow has struggled to defend these sprawling energy hubs from drone incursions that often strike hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian border. In Moscow, the Kremlin has downplayed the impact, claiming most of the attacks are minor incidents. But Russian regional governors, often under pressure to restore damaged facilities, report widespread disruption. Some areas have seen temporary fuel shortages and localized refinery shutdowns. Ukraine's message is clear. This is a campaign designed not for spectacle, but for strategic exhaustion. For Kyiv, these attacks serve multiple purposes. They cut into the budget that funds the Russian army, they erode public confidence inside Russia, and they send a message that Ukraine can strike back far beyond the front line. Vasyl Malyuk, standing before the press, represents that confidence. If we take the beginning of the year, he says, these are almost 160 successful strikes. His words, measured and factual, carry an undertone of defiance, a signal to both allies and adversaries that Ukraine's intelligence network remains active, sophisticated, and relentless. Behind Malyuk's briefing lies months of coordination between Ukraine's security service, military intelligence, and drone command units. Each operation is built on reconnaissance, mapping, and the evolving use of domestically produced drones capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers. Sources close to Ukraine's defense ministry say many of these attacks employ new generation drones, some of which can fly autonomously using pre-programmed routes, allowing Ukraine to bypass Russian electronic jamming and GPS interference. In this sense, the campaign reflects Ukraine's broader technological evolution, where once the battlefield was dominated by artillery duels, it is now shaped by data, coding, and precision engineering. Each strike also carries symbolic weight. The oil industry has long been a pillar of Russian power, financing wars, buying influence, and insulating the Kremlin from global sanctions. To target it directly is to challenge not only Moscow's logistics, but its political identity. As the months go by, Ukraine's tone has shifted from defensive resilience to strategic offense. The emphasis now is on endurance, sustaining momentum even as winter approaches and energy becomes the critical variable for both armies. Kyiv's intelligence reports indicate that some of Russia's refineries hit this year will take months to repair. Spare parts are scarce and Western sanctions restrict imports of advanced industrial equipment. Even temporary disruptions have forced the Kremlin to reroute domestic energy supplies and increase fuel imports from allies like Belarus. Western officials, while cautious in public, privately acknowledge that Ukraine's strikes are reshaping the dynamics of the war. One European defense official noted that Russia is now fighting not just a military campaign, but an economic one, a campaign of attrition on its own soil. This, observers say, is the new geography of modern warfare: refineries instead of fortresses, fuel tanks instead of trenches, and engineers as crucial as soldiers. Yet for all the strategic logic, Ukraine's leadership remains aware of the risks. Each strike on Russian territory brings potential retaliation. Moscow has already warned that future attacks could provoke broader military responses, including renewed assaults on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. In Kyiv, blackout drills are once again routine. Power grid operators prepare for fresh waves of missile strikes, even as Ukrainian engineers repair damaged substations and transformers. But inside the security service headquarters, the mood remains focused. Officials describe their mission not as revenge, but as necessity, a campaign designed to survive and to signal strength. For Ukraine's public, these updates offer both reassurance and realism. Citizens understand that the war's outcome will depend as much on resilience as on innovation. As Malyuk concludes his briefing, he adds a final note that feels almost understated: "Our operations will continue." The phrase lands like a quiet promise, one that underscores Kyiv's intent to keep pushing deeper into the economic arteries of its adversary. Across the border, Russian analysts acknowledge the challenge. State television avoids detailed coverage of the strikes, but online channels filled with footage of burning refineries tell a different story, a narrative that Moscow cannot fully contain. Each explosion, each plume of black smoke chips away at the illusion of invulnerability that the Kremlin has sought to maintain. In the larger picture, this campaign marks a turning point, a sign that Ukraine, once on the defensive, is now shaping the rhythm of escalation. The war, once defined by territorial advances and retreats, has evolved into a contest of endurance, innovation, and strategy. For the international audience, Malyuk's briefing offers more than numbers. It reflects the resolve of a nation determined not to surrender its initiative, even under relentless pressure. Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil facilities have become a narrative of persistence, each one a message written in fire and smoke, reminding the world that the war's front lines are not confined to maps. They extend into economies, supply chains, and the unseen machinery of power. As cameras shut down and the press disperses, the city outside continues its rhythm: sirens, trams, and the steady hum of resilience. The people of Kyiv, weary but unbroken, know that every strike announced in a press briefing is more than a statistic. It is a small assertion of sovereignty and a reminder that in this long war, Ukraine still holds its own agency. And for Vasyl Malyuk, his final words encapsulate that quiet defiance that has defined Ukraine's struggle: "We will continue until the source of this aggression can no longer afford to fight." Gabriel Boric came to Gyeongju not to demand privilege, but to demand principle. His speech was both rebuke and reassurance: a rebuke to those who wield power without restraint, and a reassurance that dialogue, equality, and trust still have champions in a world that too often confuses might for right. And as the summit moves into its next sessions on AI, trade, and digital governance, his message endures: that genuine progress depends not on who wins the next trade dispute, but on who remembers the human cost behind every policy. Because, as Boric reminded the world that day, peace may be disruptive, but it is the only disruption that leads to survival.